to the Messianics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Welcome back to the podcast. This is Rabbi Eric. I'm joined by Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi David, and Rabbi Toby, and we're going to have a discussion today based on some conversations that we've had, not only with each other over the years, but with other people, in line with or considering the fact that the Messianic movement is a growing movement, but among leadership, we are not seeing as many young people step into leadership and follow along. So we're looking at the next generation and the generation after that and trying to look and find people that are going to be able to step up and step in to replace the leaders today. And in the conversation, we found that a lot of young people and people our age who were young people, or my age that were young people, and your ages that are younger, one of the reasons they either aren't in ministry or aren't in messianic ministry is because they were discouraged by people in leadership when they went to them and tried to share their heart or their desire or what they felt was their calling, and they were received in a way that was pushback or discouraging. And so we want to have a conversation about both the things that were said that were discouraging, but also maybe how we as leaders can do a better job of speaking into the lives of those that come to us and share their desire to be in a ministry. And some of those discussions have to do with, for instance, we've talked to a lot of women who wanted to be involved in ministry, but were immediately told that they couldn't be involved simply because they were women. Now, discussion about whether they should be rabbis or other things we can hold for another time, but there are a lot of opportunities in ministry that many young ladies are pushed away from simply because they're women and young ladies instead of men. There's other times where, because somebody is not Jewish, there's pushback against them for simply because they're not qualified because they're not Jewish. There's others, and one of the big ones that I heard quite often from young people was, I don't have the education, so I don't have a degree, I don't have a certificate, I don't have ordination, I'm not in, so I need to wait until I get certification and finish so many years of school before I can start being in ministry. And that's one of the big ones is people, because first of all, none of us, I don't know anybody that got into ministry that felt like they were qualified to do it. I mean, it doesn't matter who they are, how successful a leader they are. Very few people feel like, yeah, I'm qualified, I've got it, I'm ready. Most of us look at it as, I'm unqualified, but God called me, so I'm going to dig down and do this because I have a calling on my life. So most of us start out feeling a little disqualified to go into ministry to begin with. We don't know enough, we don't have enough experience, we're not talented enough, gifted enough, all the questions on things that are discouraging to ourselves. But then to have somebody who we look up to, somebody who's our rabbi or our leader or our mentor or somebody in line between us and our goal to just shoot us down because of things like, well, you're not smart enough, you're not educated enough, you haven't, and one of the things is that I've heard is you haven't paid your dues yet. You haven't struggled enough. You haven't, all of those things. So we want to have a conversation, and I hope that you guys will share some of your actual experiences, things that have happened that push back against you, and not so that we can talk about other people, but to demonstrate that somebody putting up a roadblock or somebody putting a speed bump in front of us doesn't necessarily mean it's the end, and we shouldn't look at it that way. That sometimes we have to jump over the speed bump or go around the wall or over the wall to get to where God called us, because somebody who said something or did something who shouldn't have did. And sometimes we get discouraged because somebody says it's not time and it really isn't time yet. So we have to keep that in mind also as we have this discussion. So I'm going to throw the ball up in the air, and if one of y'all want to hop into the fray, I'll let you go.
Well, my experience being non-Jewish, being Gentile, I can certainly relate to what Rabbi Eric said as far as getting something discouraging because I'm not Jewish. The first one that comes to mind was when I heard a leader say, not to me personally, but I mean, I was in the crowd, I guess, when he said it. When this person was speaking to a group of people, and was specifically talking about non-Jews. When he was talking about Israel as God's people and stuff. And he said, Israel is God's people, and Gentiles, at best, you're grafted in. Now, people, there's a saying, sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I believe that. Oftentimes people will say something stupid or ridiculous or nonsensical, which that absolutely was. It was ridiculous. It just slaps against the whole Bible. But aside from that, the defense that people, I think, who struggle with a degree of arrogance is they'll do something wrong or they'll say something wrong, and they believe that because they didn't mean it that way, that you can't be mad at them or you can't be upset at them or you can't object because, well, that's not really what I meant. No. It doesn't matter if that's not what you meant. That's what you did, right? Well, I didn't mean to do that. It doesn't matter. You did it, right? So I actually spoke to this particular person about what they said. I said, hey, you said that Israel is God's people and Gentiles at best you're grafted in. I said, I can't tell you how badly that was worded and how offensive that was. I took offense to that because that's not at all what the Bible says. The Bible says that Gentiles, through faith in Messiah, are co-heirs and co-equal. I said, so it's not at best. I said, it's not like, I said, the way you make it sound is, Israel is the gold medal, Gentiles is silver or bronze or whatever. At best, this is what you are. At best, you're just kind of on the coattails of Israel, and that's not at all what the Bible says.
Yeah, in many places it actually says the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the response of this person was, you just took what I said out of context. So it was a total projection. It was my fault. It was my fault that I was offended. It's got to be a wonderful thing if you never make mistakes and everyone else is just taking you wrong.
Right.
Yeah, and I think probably you were more discouraged by his comment after the original comment than you were from the first one.
Yeah, and it was so bad that I got up and acted like I was excusing myself to use the restroom or something. But I went outside. Brooke followed me. She knew. She's much wiser than me in many respects, and she really had to calm me down. I was livid because I was offended and hurt, But I did do what I think what anybody should do is you should question, hey, appeal. You shouldn't say, excuse me, you said a bunch of bull crap. There's a way to do it, right? To be a respectful way to appeal or disagree with anyone. But what was even worse, as Rabbi Eric said, was being told that, well, you just took that out of context. That's not what I meant. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But okay. That's stunning. A stunning response by someone who's supposed to be in leadership. So that was discouraging. That's enough to make you want to be like, who cares about any of this stuff? This isn't worth, But and that's not the first time. That's one example. Getting the response of, well, you do understand that because you're not Jewish, blank, is something that I've gotten as recent as just a couple months ago. And I've been in this thing for 20 years. And I just have to learn how to let that roll off. and use the Spirit of God and the things that He's brought me through in the past 20 years to kind of allow that to be kind of a Teflon, because I don't know if that's going away anytime soon. So, it's taken me a while to be happy in my own skin. So that was one. That's one that I remember that moment like it was like yesterday, and I hate that. And I'm forgiving. It's people say stupid stuff. It's just, it's hard when they say something stupid and they double down on it and they say no. This is what I said. So without making that just a diatribe about the same old stuff, I'll just use that as one example in connection with what Eric said. And the fact of the matter is that I think it is frustrating for non-Jews, because the Messianic movement is mostly non-Jews, and that's just simply because of mathematics of the number of Jews versus just non-Jews in the world. So if you take a cross-section of any group of people, whether it's a church or the Messianic movement, Jewish people are a minority. That was tough. So that's just one of my examples. And what's funny is that's a lot of the examples of the most discouraging things that I've ever been told. It usually has to do with my non-Jewishness.
Yeah,
it's just it's the burden that I bear.
It's ironically the thing that also keeps a lot of Jews from coming to Messianic Judaism,
right?
Because the church overwhelmingly has the majority of Jewish believers, and because they encounter Messiah there, they really do embrace the concept of the one new man. Mm-hmm. And when they do there and they understand it biblically, which again many of them do, they look at a lot of the stuff that happens and is said like that, within our own circles, and they're like, that is unbiblical, and why would I join with that? Why would I put my Jewishness in with this very un-Jewish, unbiblical position that is concocted out of, fear, mostly, a lot of the times. Mm-hmm. Fear of Gentiles, becoming, having more power than, that you think they should have, or whatever.
Yeah, I get it. I get the fleshly desire that everybody wants to be number one. And we like that. You either have a little bit of that or you have a lot, but everybody's got it. Nobody has none.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be either the favorite, you want to be favorite. It's something that you have to fight against. It's just this idea of what the flesh desires, and I think that for some it's just, I'm just letting you guys know I'm very special, and you are special too, but not in the way that I am, and that's just silly. It's interesting. I don't, God loves plain old people, and that's really what the Bible states. It's amazing that some people think that they have something that they're going to bring before God, and God's going to go, man, I've never seen anything like that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it comes from. It's just good old-fashioned pride. But
yeah, that's what the Yeshua encounters with the Pharisees. They tell him, like, we're sons of Abraham. He's like, these stones can be made into sons of Abraham. Like, it is not. You are not something you think you are if you don't worship me.
Yeah.
And I want to say real quick, just for those that are listening to this episode who perhaps have that attitude that, Gentiles are lesser than or whatever else, these are, you've got Rabbi Toby and Rabbi Jonathan sitting here talking about how demoralizing these types of attitudes and comments are in the midst of Messianic Judaism. Toby's talked about how he's stuck it out for 20 years dealing with the same old crap from the movement over and over again. And the reality is that these are two dudes that are putting all of their effort, all of their giftings and talents and everything into building Messianic Judaism, and they're not trying to, which is one of the accusations that if we get too many Gentiles in, all it's going to do is water down the Jewishness. It's going to water down what but there's no effort at. They're honoring the Jewish culture and tradition in very beautiful ways and very intentional on doing so. So if you're listening to this episode and you have that mindset that Gentiles in the Messianic movement are either lesser than or not worth it, you might want to reevaluate that opinion and that attitude, because the reality is the future of Messianic Judaism, whether you like it or not, definitely includes Jew and Gentile as one.
Yeah, and when you consider that when we read in the scriptures, it doesn't appear that God has that same opinion. For instance, when Moses was leading the children of Israel, it took a Gentile to help him to establish. God used Jethro to help Moses establish the leadership structure for Israel. So here he used a Gentile to speak. And when you think about this, God could have just told Moses to do that. But God brought Jethro to Moses to instruct Moses, which something that then became Torah and instruction for Israel. So God spoke that portion of instruction through a Gentile into Israel. And when you consider, for instance, that Caleb, who led Israel into the promised land alongside of Joshua, was a Kenizzite, a Gentile. It doesn't
and the first judge of Israel was his brother Othniel, who it specifically calls a Kenizzite also.
Right, and so when we look at this is not diminishing the value of the Jewish people, but it's also not like it doesn't mean that in order for Jewish people to have the honor that God wants Jewish people to have, that Gentiles have to be dishonored in order to achieve that. Right. We can do better than that. And we were talking with and vice versa. We were talking with a pastor yesterday, Rabbi Jonathan and I, and I had written a blog, and I meant to put a verse into that blog, and the verse was about where the Lord says, "Israel is my firstborn son," which is one of those things that Jewish people and descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob look at and go, "Yep, that's us. That's our tag. That's our line." But the part that we don't pay attention to is, in order for there to be a firstborn son, there has to be other sons.
Right.
There has to be other sons of God that aren't outside of the relationship, that aren't lesser than. Rabbi David is my firstborn son, but I also have another son, and I wouldn't call David my firstborn if I didn't have a secondborn.
Right.
And they're not lesser than one another because David was firstborn. And so it's just important that we understand that God doesn't look at it that way, and we shouldn't either, and that God calls non-Jewish people to serve within his kingdom alongside of Jewish people, not below Jewish people, but alongside, grafted in along with, not grafted in lesser than. And it's just an important thing. Another discouraging thing that I've had young people tell me that they heard was, for instance, someone who felt like they were a worship leader or were called to be a worship leader, and start doing it, and have somebody say, "Well, who do you think you are, Paul Wilbur?"
Right.
Or, they feel called to preach. "Well, who do you think you are, Jonathan Kahn?" And I'm only using those names because they're the very well-known, recognized names, but that's the kind of a comment of comparison, when the truth is none of us are supposed to be Paul Wilbur or Jonathan Kahn except for Paul Wilbur and Jonathan Kahn. If God calls us to something, he called us to be it and do it. But that can be demoralizing when somebody feels called to do something and they're put down because they're not equal to someone who's been doing it for 40 years.
Right.
I think one of the most discouraging things I've experienced in the movement as a whole is the constant calling, and it happens a lot, the constant calling for, we need to raise up the next generation of leaders. We need to train and educate, because we're not going to be here forever. But then out the same face, and a lot of times in the exact same message, you'll hear that individual say something like, "Well, these millennials, these Gen Alphas, these whatever, all they want to do is take our pulpit. All they want to do is push us out the way. They don't want to work with us. They just want to push us aside," or and what have you. Likewise, I've also heard a lot of senior leaders who have had bad experiences with assistant, associate rabbis, worship leaders, whatever, who are quick to go, oh, you got to be careful bringing on an assistant rabbi. You got to be careful bringing on a worship leader, because that's where the problems always are. It's always those people that cause a split. And sometimes you gotta wonder if they understand that problems have two sides, and that generally speaking, both people involved are part of the problem. And you can't just blame the entire role because you guys had an issue that you didn't settle right or what have you. But I think that growing up in the Messianic movement, growing up most of my life knowing what I was supposed to do, like what my calling was, I've watched far too many discouraging things be said about next generation and next generation leaders and what have you. And it just drives me nuts when we talk outside of both sides of our faces. We need a future because we realize we're not going to be here forever, but also we don't want you because you're in our way.
Right, or we don't trust you, which is really a discouraging thing. Because and I've been in conferences, leadership conferences, seminars where both of those things were said. We need to raise up the next generation. We need to turn over to Joshua's and all that. But at the same, then say, but you can't trust these people. They'll stab you in the back. They'll steal your people. They'll, and that doesn't mean that those things haven't happened in cases and things. But if you say both of those things at the same time, you're going to discourage anybody, because if somebody wanted to come alongside of you and you just said, we need to have people to walk alongside of us, but we're not going to trust them.
Yeah. Look, I was at the IMCS Rabbis Conference a few years ago, and it was, and I've gone to it, I don't know,
most of
15, 20 years, consistently. And it was funny to me because it was the first time I had ever seen, it was the highest attendance at that conference of under 50. And the fact that we're saying under 50 is young is absurd, but that's just the reality of the rabbis in our movement. But it was the highest attendance of under 50. And I would say probably 40 of those were under 40, maybe even under 30. And everybody was excited because we had this massive group of younger leaders that were there, and this is awesome, this is encouraging. But also at the same time, literally the entire programming of the conference from start to finish was tailored to the 60-plus crowd, including one specific message where a rabbi stood up and said, if you're 60, 70, 80 years old, I want you to know that that God's not done with you. Your best days still lie ahead of you, and there's so much more to do for you, and you don't have to worry about who's coming behind you, and da-da-da. And I'm like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you acting this way? Like, yes, 60, 70, 80, yes, your best days can still be ahead of you. That's absolutely true, but you don't have to negate the people that are in the room that want to work with you to see a future for this as well.
Yeah. Well, and not terribly surprising was the next year there were far fewer younger people in attendance.
When I went for my ordination with the IMCS, which the reality is it was a very long process for me, particularly because I had applied 3 times before I got accepted into the ordination process. And the first few times that I applied, they literally just threw my application away. When I sat down finally for my interview to be able to enter into the program, I sit down for my interview, and the rabbis that I'm meeting with at this point, I'm already in full-time ministry in a Messianic congregation. I've already gone to school and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm sitting there with them, and they go, hey, so we know you've applied a few times before. We know you've been trying, and whatever. And he goes, can I be honest with you? I was like, sure. So we just really didn't know what to do with you. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, we've never had anybody that is as young as you are, that has the pedigree that you have, and also has the education that you have and the experience that you have, all in one package. And we just didn't know what to do with that. And I looked at him and said, so can you honestly look me in the eyes and tell me you don't see where the problem is in that? And he was like, huh? I said, well, this is exactly what you've been saying for decades. You've been praying for. And the one chance that you have that you actually have that in front of you, and instead of just running with it, you push it aside for almost 10 years because you, quote unquote, didn't know what to do with it. Like it, and honestly, that was one of those things that, like, if I had allowed the human side of me to take control, I would have just walked out and never looked back and been done with it.
And I can tell you that one of as a father watching my son go through this process and all these things, one of the things that I've seen hit him in a discouraging way, and this may be for other people listening also, is that for years, and I'm so thankful now that he is leading his congregation. He is now a vice president of organization. He's doing things where he has, but I cannot tell you the number of times that he was either introduced as my son or in some way, like, in his introduction, it was as if they had to have, the only way he was valid is if they inserted Rabbi Eric into it. Like I heard he was on a radio interview.
I was going to bring that up. Bagels and Blessings.
Yeah, Bagels and Blessings. And wonderful radio program. Yeah. Encourage you to listen to it if you don't already. Ethel is just an amazing lady who's been doing a Messianic radio program for a long time. But she's doing the introduction, and it's like...
and she was interviewing me because of one of my books.
Right. And then she comes off with, and many of you know him because of his father. Yeah. So and so. So
it wasn't just that, but almost every question she asked me had nothing to do with the book and had to do with me being your kid.
Right. So I want to encourage those in the movement, those listening, to try to, and as much as I appreciate the fact that people recognize who I am in certain ways, when you see young people come up, let them be their own person. Let them have their value as their own ministry, what they're doing, not just if every time you talk about them you mention their father or their uncle or their brother or somebody else. It is discouraging because it doesn't allow them to know or feel or recognize their value as the individual, and that diminishes and discourages people.
Yeah. I'm gonna still one of Rabbi Toby's. I don't know if he was going to bring this up or not, but this was reasonably recent, like within the last year, and it discouraged me because of the attitude that it came from. And that was he was in a minyan at a conference, and somebody had asked him to lead a prayer, and so he led a prayer. And one of the rabbis who's been around forever. Just basically in front of everybody, like not even hey, let me talk to him outside after this is over, but just in front of everybody goes, well, that's not how a Jew would do it. And I mean, just very at the same time, like, and he says this after several other people had, kind of praised him, for lack of a better way of wording it, for the way that he did the prayer and that it was a blessing and what have you. And they're sort of, well, that's not how a Jew would do it. And I'm just like, what is wrong with people? Who cares? First off, who friggin' cares? The words were the same. The heart was the same. Who friggin' cares?
Right. And the other point is that for almost every liturgical prayer we have, there are more tunes to do it to, and each congregation is going to, like your congregation, some of your liturgy, although similar, is different in how you sing it and chant it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And to say this isn't how a Jew would do it is like saying which Jew.
Yeah.
Is this how a Reformed Jew will do it, or is this how a Orthodox or a Conservative, or is this how Ashkenazi or Sephardic or Mizrahi or Yemenite or European or American or it's just a ridiculous thing to say that's not how a Jew would do it. The other is that at least I was taught in synagogue that the honor of leading a prayer, the honor of reading from the Torah, the honor of doing something in that way is never to be diminished by. In other words, if you're reading the Torah and you make a mistake, you're not supposed to bring that out in a showy way, because it diminishes the honor that the person is standing in by reading or doing that. If they're doing liturgy, unless they lose their place where you have to help them to do it or whatever. However that person does it, if it's honoring God and it's consistent with what the wording says, you don't mock or belittle them at all, because they're walking in that moment of honor that God is giving them for that moment, for that time.
Yeah, and by the way, and the prayer was it was the Elenu, and I've been saying that for 15 years, and I wasn't mispronouncing or anything. It was it was the accent. It was simply my accent, I guess, which is very Southern. Right? No, but I wasn't.
How dare you have a Southern accent?
But I mean, I wasn't butchering it. I wasn't butchering the Elena, which I've heard people do.
Yeah,
and get away with.
I've heard Jewish people do,
and
one in particular.
And the fact is, though, but I will tell you this: my wife, Brooke, since October 7th, she has joined this community of Israelis that are over in Israel, and she just felt a pull. She's very social media savvy and tech savvy.
I see a lot of
things.
videos.
I don't really have an interest in social media, and that's fine. But my wife is very active on social media, and so through a social media platform has these friends which she's made the past year. And Brooke doesn't lie about who she is as far as being Messianic, and she doesn't lie about not being Jewish. And she's very open and honest about who she is. She has since had opportunities to speak with people about Yeshua. She's had the opportunities just to speak about Israel through a biblical lens, through a biblical perspective. And she's had the opportunity they even do these things, they do fun stuff. They do these things where this whole group will get together and they'll have people sing. And she sang duets with Israeli singers. She did this one song, and the girl got in touch with her and says, I want to do that again. Here's where I'm getting at. There's an Israeli guy. I don't know if he's in Tel Aviv or not, but he's not a believer at all. I mean, he's not religious at all. He was talking to just Brooke.
He's very Tel Aviv and he's very Israeli.
Yeah, he said, but this is a guy that wouldn't know God if you fell over.
Right, yeah.
And he told my wife, he said, I don't care what anybody says. You're Jewish. Now, you have to understand what he means. What he's saying is you're one of us. He's not actually saying she's bi. He's not dubbing her a Jew.
Yeah.
He's not, But you know what I mean.
He didn't lead her through conversion.
No, you know what I mean.
Right, it's that heart of Ruth.
Yeah.
It's that you're with us.
And if you look at that situation, that's not the only time someone said something like that to her, and it's because of her heart and her expression, but it's her heart. And I think there are people in the Messianic movement who, if you know God and you know the Lord through Messiah, then you should be ahead of the curve with that.
Right.
And I think that it's shameful. Absolutely. The frustration and the shamefulness, I think, is staggering. That someone who doesn't know God, has it over people who know the Lord when it comes to acceptance and equality in God's eyes. And it amazes me that someone, and I've never had anybody say that to me who was a believer, right, in the Messianic movement.
Right.
And my wife had somebody say that to her from Israel out in the world. And I think that, I hope, if someone who does hold that view, they probably, I don't know, if they don't have a decent amount of humility, they probably didn't make it this far into the episode. But if they're listening to that, that should be staggeringly convicting.
Yeah, absolutely.
In what place is the world doing it better than God's people?
Yep.
It's gross.
And here's the reality is, and I talk about this a lot at CMC, is when Joshua's spies go to Jericho and they meet with Rahab. Rahab tells them, in essence, that the people of Canaan had been scared to death of Israel since they left Egypt. So for the entire 40 years that Israel wasted time in the wilderness not trusting in God's promises, the nations, the people in Canaan who didn't believe in God at all, who wanted nothing to do with them, they believed in God's faithfulness, they believed in God's promises more than the people of the promise did. And here's the reality of it in the modern world, is that there are Gentiles who have a burning desire to be a part of what Messianic Judaism is. And it's not because, they feel like there's some clout or some, whatever that goes with it, but because they have a heart for the reality that the one new man is Jew and Gentile in this construct in Messianic Judaism. And so when we see the Jewish community as a whole having a better perspective of Gentiles coming alongside of Jews in Messianic Judaism than we do Jews in Messianic Judaism, it's a major problem. I saw a video right after October 7th. This Chabad rabbi, I think he was in Mexico, Chabad rabbi was talking about what was happening. He said, look, if you look around us and you see what's happening in the world and you don't think that Mashiach is coming, then you're not paying attention. He said because Judaism has always believed that when Mashiach comes, that he's going to draw the hearts of the nations to Israel and to the Jewish people. He's going to draw the hearts of the nations to the Torah. And he goes, since October 7th, that's exactly what's been happening, is the hearts of the nations have been turning to Israel and to the Jewish people. And we need to understand as Messianic Judaism that is a very reality of not only what the scriptures talk about, but of what Judaism has always believed. Like, people have told Rabbi Eric, in essence, I'm paraphrased from my memory, he can clarify it if it's different than this, but from my memory, people have told him over the years that Jewish people, non-believing Jewish people, that Brit Am is one of the last honest representations of Judaism in Pensacola, because of the fact that in Brit Am are Jews and Gentiles worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob together, whereas everywhere else it's segregated, it's pushed aside. You don't see Gentiles walking into a traditional, like a conservative synagogue on a weekly basis to worship with them. Yeah. They may come in to do a project for a multicultural education class or for a religions class or something like that, but you don't see Gentiles just chilling out in a conservative or even Orthodox Reformed synagogue just for the sake of it. You don't see all that many trying to go through conversions and so on. I mean, it happens, but it's not like this mass flux. But the reality is in Messianic Judaism, not only are we seeing Jews come to faith, but we're seeing the nations come to the Jewish Messiah in a Jewish context. And I think that's important. And I think that's something that the Jewish world also sees. They may not like that it's happening in our midst, but I think it's something they see. And the fact that non-believing Jews are more open to Gentiles participating in these things than Messianic Jews are, I think is pretty problematic and telling in and of itself. And especially for, and I'm going to backtrack this a little bit, because I know this whole episode wasn't intended to be on Jews and Gentiles, and it's kind of morphed that way, which is fine. Like, a lot of times our conversations on these episodes just morph in different directions organically. The whole reality is this episode is about discouragement and discouraging things that have been said to us and how it's affected our walk. And I think we've heard very little from Jonathan, so feel free to pipe in at some point. But aside from that, I think it's important that we understand that a lot of these leaders, not all of them, but a lot of these Messianic Jewish leaders that are disparaging to Gentiles in the movement are married to Gentiles. Right, and the fact that they're good enough to live in my house with me, but they're not good enough to be a part of my ministry. They're not good enough to be a part of the Messianic movement. They're not. That's just atrocious to me. And so many Messianic congregations will market themselves as a place for Jews who want to discover the Jewish heritage of Yeshua, or a Jewish home for Jewish believers, and we're also a home for mixed marriages that don't know how to explain. I was just reading a Messianic congregation's website the other day, and that was one of the things they said. We're a home for Jewish believers. We're a home for non-believing Jews who are interested in Messianic or in Messiah. We're a home for mixed marriages with one Jewish spouse and a non-Jewish spouse trying to figure out how to raise their kids and their multicultural perspective and da-da-da. And I'm like, look, yes, mixed marriages, awesome, great, it happens. That's wonderful, that's fantastic. But those aren't the only Gentiles we should be concerned about either.
Imagine if you're the spouse who hears, how discouraging is that to be in that situation. So, I know we're running long on this episode, or at least it feels like we are, but I wanted to bring up one last discouraging thing that I've heard, and it's something that we try to deal with at Brit Am. I know you guys do it at Maim Chaim, and that is you're too young. And there's a lot of that young people who are energized and excited about serving, but are told you're too young. Wait till you get a little older. Matter of fact, at our synagogue every week we pray over our littles, our children, and part of the prayer is, may you not wait until you're old to serve in the kingdom. We want our young people to feel like they can be involved in ministry even as a young person, because they have opportunity to share with their friends, with others, to be involved. We invite them to be involved in, once they're bar and bat mitzvah age, to read from the Torah, to be involved in the worship team, to do things. We don't have, and I'm not knocking those that do, but we don't have a youth worship team and an adult worship team. We just have a worship team, and if you're old enough and skilled enough, you're part of our community. We don't want people to feel like they're the junior varsity who may someday get called up to the majors and make it to the big league. We want people to, and unfortunately we've done that to our young people.
Not to pick on you, but to back up for a second, you started it out by saying, don't tell people they're too young, and then your qualifications for worship team is if you're old enough and skilled enough.
Well, because no, I'm saying if you're skilled enough,
I know what you mean. I just thought it was funny.
If you have the talent to do it, because we have some young people that play violin or play piano or whatever that are less than 13.
Yep.
That have the ability to do it, and we don't want to discourage them and say, okay, you guys are in a lesser group. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a 11-year-old plays the piano better than the adults in the group, and they should be welcome to serve in their giftings before they, because if you don't let them work for God, they'll use it for something else. Somebody will give them opportunity to use that talent, and either they're going to use it for the kingdom or they'll use it against the kingdom, but it's going to be used by them, and we need to be careful not to do that. So it's just really important that we don't tell our young people that they can only do this, or tell a young person that because they feel called to teach or to preach that they have to be the youth leader or the youth, and not actually share in a regular service or a Bible study to adults.
Yeah, I think that with young people, if they're like youth age, or bar bat mitzvah age, 11, 12, 13, the key to letting them serve is to let them serve and supplement that with discipleship and things like that. And that's really what they need. They need guidance, because being on stage is a really powerful drug. And I've seen people in their 50s and 60s act like babies over positions on the stage.
Right.
And it's and I think that adults need discipleship as well, and I think I'm just agreeing with what Rabbi Eric's saying. I'm saying the key is not to not let them serve. The key is to allow them to serve with guidance and discipleship.
Absolutely,
and that's really, because that's really the biggest thing. The biggest thing is trying. The biggest thing is teaching people how to manage being able to be on a stage if their service is a front facing where they're in front of people. Because I'm telling you, I have never in all my years of leadership heard someone get upset about not being able to clean a bathroom, but I've seen people go berserk because they didn't get to sing that week, or they got to sing with somebody, or they didn't get to do liturgy that week.
Right.
And they'll come up and bet, can I? And I'm like, so that's when you need the discipleship.
Yeah, when I was in the business world, when I worked in retail, when we were looking to hire somebody, when they came in, I would drop a piece of paper on the floor, and then as they walked to fill out paperwork to get on the computer to enter their stuff, I would watch and see if they stooped down to pick up the paper, to see if is this somebody who's going to I want to hire. Do they care about things? Are they going to just pick out this piece of paper? Or are they just going to walk around it or step over it? And it's the same way in the synagogue. When somebody wants to do something in the synagogue in leadership or up front, I watch and see, is this somebody who takes out the trash? Is this somebody who helps wash the dishes? Is this somebody who picks up in the synagogue? Are they willing to set up things? Are they willing to serve? Because you have to be a servant in order to be in leadership. And so we watch those things and see, how do they respond when I say, can you run this to here? Or can you pick that up? Or would you unplug this or plug that in or whatever? And depending on how they respond is whether or not I'm going to let them get up in front of people.
I used to do something similar when I was in management in restaurants. If somebody came in and asked for an application and then sat down to fill it out and also asked for a pen, I would give them a pen, let them fill it out, but their application got filed into the no callback. Because if you couldn't show up to fill an application prepared, then I know you're not going to show up prepared to do your job either.
Sure. Yeah, I think the age thing sometimes, the disparity that's sometimes shown towards the younger generation, and it's really kind of funny because it's actually like borrowed from the secular world, and you can see it. It's in, it's a very normal, like, adult thing to be able to, because I was a teenager whenever it was millennials this, millennials that. Mm-hmm. Constantly. And so I think sometimes it's not even just in what is said, but what's not said but done. I remember one year, for whatever reason, I felt like a lot of that year's stuff and conversation had dealt with younger generations, newer people. And then that year at the Southeast, they deliberately had something and a group and a place set up for the young people, and it was the most patronizing thing. It was like, oh yeah, young people are all about pizza and selfies, so it's going to be like pizza selfies, pizza selfies, pizza selfies. And I was like, dude, this is retarded. Like, why are you making this out to be like, look at what we have. We have pizza and selfies, snacks, and I'm like, please stop. Like, this is not, like, none of us are here for that. None of us who are here under the age of 40 are here to take selfies and, to go to the snack room. Like you want to pour into young people, actually, like, say, like, hey, like, what are the concerns you have that are like things we can actually pair you with other rabbis and people to disciple you, to guide you, walk you through figuring these things out. Because some of these young people, they weren't people who necessarily, like, I have a very unique relationship with Rabbi Eric, and that we have a synagogue where there isn't a senior rabbi and a younger rabbi. There are a lot of congregations that don't have that. A lot of congregations where the new younger leader is there by just default. Like, it's him. They were set up or they were brought up, and there is no senior leader. There's no mentor ahead of them. And so, but rather than offer that, or even the Rabbis Conference, where in that particular year, there were a lot of young people at Rabbis Conference as well. And then, of course, again, the year after that, there were not so many. But, why not have those things? Those are the important things. So it's almost as if, they don't look to their own lives. Because most people, I would hope when you get to that age, you can look back and go, when you get to your 60s and 70s, I would hope you can look back and be like, man, I really just wish I had someone walking alongside me, helping me not make the mistakes I made, and to go the directions that are good and avoiding problems. And rather than looking at, like, social media, what do young people like? That's not the way. Like, we don't.
That's what baby boomers do. Like, this is the young people like this stuff.
Yeah.
They don't know.
As the kids say.
As the kids. Hello, my fellow kids.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tommy.
There was one year at the Messiah Conference. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't mind sharing this. I won't use names, but I'll tell you where I was at. It was the Messiah Conference. And, they always give those surveys.
Yeah.
What did you like? What did you didn't? Man, I was just like, let's go.
And it's anonymous, so you get to go all out on it.
But that year, so for YMJA night, always spectacular. They had a specific artist who was very poppy. I guess someone that the kids would like.
The kids would like.
And the big thing at the end was the YMJ. I didn't go out there. the YMJ went out and did a flash dance with this person. Now, a flash dance is when it's just essentially when
like a flash mob kind of
yeah,
thing.
like a flash mob.
Definitely not as bad as it sounds.
People just show up, a flash dance or whatever. Yeah, it's when people just show up and start dancing, you know. And the plan was that they were going to do it on this person's last song, and they just come out with sunglasses and they're doing this flash dance.
Right.
And when I got my survey, and when I got to the pertinent question about, you know, what I didn't like or what they could do better, I just wrote one question, or really more of a statement, really more of a request. It was, please tell me how a flash dance with inserted artist name tells our movement that the next generation is ready to carry the torch forward. That's all I said. Now, I'm not saying they listened to me. They might have just got mad, or they might have just been like, who cares? I know this much. Next year, no flash dance. But I think that's patently insane.
Yeah.
And no, it's just that it just goes along with what Jonathan said.
Yeah, I do want to say that the movement, at least the parts that I'm involved in, have over the last few years made some positive efforts to include young people into things.
Yeah, I'm talking about my idea, and that was over 10 years ago.
No, I know. I'm just saying we have made some efforts to...
If by efforts you mean to acknowledge the existence of, then yes.
Well, I mean, if you go to any of the major conferences now, at least a couple of the nights, there's younger speakers there. There's, you know, so there's some effort. And again, I'm not saying it's reached there or we've achieved what I desire,
sure,
but at least there's some movement.
I just don't think there's anything wrong. The best people in the Bible faced their failures head on.
Right.
And as long as you do that, God will take you through them.
Absolutely.
And I just don't think there's anything wrong with looking back to, say, this particular time and this, you know, flash dance type stuff, pizza selfies type stuff, and saying, man, we made a mistake. That was stupid, and we failed in that regard.
Absolutely.
People can't do that, though. And that's why, and listen, I just got to be honest with you, whether it's your personal relationship with God or it's an organizational, corporate type thing, and if you can't take your failures and weaknesses and those kinds of things head on, it's just not going to work with God. He can't bless if we're not honest about, you know, what's working and what isn't. But that was just, again, that wasn't necessarily something discouraging someone said to me. It was just discouraging
in general.
It was discouraging to witness.
Right. And so we've got to do a little better at that. And so
we're actually we're actually providing answers when questions are asked. Because I remember there was a young, and by young people I'm talking about, you know, like 18 to 40. But
it's a very wide range.
Yeah. They a question was asked one time in one of these meetups. You know, hey, how do I go about this? And the response was, thank you for volunteering to figure that out. I was like, that is not an answer.
Yeah.
Like, they were asking a specific question about how to...
It's actually kind of a rude response.
Yeah, it is. Because it was like, this is a young person, I want to say in their 20s, who was, and you know, not me, who was actually genuinely concerned about, asking for a friend, you know. Who was like, I want to know how to do this for my community. Not just for my synagogue, but like the local, like, body of faith within my region, my little pocket of the world. And then they got this very kind of prissy non-answer. Yeah. And I was like,
thanks for volunteering to do the research.
I was like, okay, my guy.
Yeah. So as we wrap up the episode, and we have not even scratched the surface on the many things that have been said to discourage people, in not just in our movement, but beyond. But I want to encourage you, first of all, if you've heard any of these kind of things or any others, please don't let that stop you from pushing forward, from moving forward. Find people that will encourage you, that will mentor you, that will lift you up instead of pushing you down. And if you have a situation where you were discouraged by a leader, I'm working on something and I'd like your help with it. And if you would just send me an email of what it was. Don't include the name, the place, just what was said that discouraged you from heading toward ministry. And email me at raveric@bridom.org. That's RAVERIC at britaahm.org. I would appreciate the help.
And if you're in leadership, your focus should be to encourage, not to discourage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you have said things that are discouraging, repent. And then it quite literally is in the love your neighbor as yourself thing. Like, think about what do you want to hear from your friends? What do you want to hear from your mentors about continuing on with the mission God's given you to do? You want to be encouraged, not told that you're too young or not educated enough or
Not Jewish
enough or
not male enough.
And let's be honest, it doesn't matter how hard you work to build a ministry, to build a movement, to build whatever. If you're discouraging the people, if you're a pioneer waiting for the next generation to take over what you did and move it forward, you can't expect that after building and building and building, that turning away all of that new blood by discouraging them and tearing them down is going to do anything to further the future. You're going to run it, and then as soon as you're gone, it's going to be gone because you pushed away everybody that would have been there for you.
Simply said short, if what you have to say isn't to lift up, it might be best just to shut up. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Messy Antics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at Messy Antics Podcast.